I didn't cry when I saw her wearing my ring. I just stood there, holding a tray of champagne flutes, smiling like the perfect hostess while my entire marriage split open in front of 200 guests. The charity gala was my idea. My funding. My connections. My guest list. And yet somehow, I was the only one in that ballroom who didn't know my husband had decided to debut his mistress. Her name was Lila. 24. Soft blonde hair. Eyes wide and innocent like she'd just wandered out of a perfume commercial. She stood beside Daniel as if she belonged there. As if she hadn't just slipped her hand into his while photographers snapped pictures. And on her finger, my grandmother's emerald ring. The one Daniel had claimed was in the vault for safekeeping. I remember the exact moment I noticed it. A flash of green under chandelier light. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Similar setting. Similar cut. Then she lifted her glass. And I saw the tiny flaw on the stone's edge. The one I'd memorized as a child when my grandmother told me, "Real things aren't perfect, Ivy. That's how you know they're real." That was my ring. My pulse didn't spike. My breathing didn't change. I just set the tray down. Across the ballroom, Daniel spotted me. For half a second, something flickered in his face. Not guilt. Not shame. Annoyance. Like I'd arrived early to a surprise party I wasn't invited to. He leaned toward Lila and whispered something. She giggled. Actually giggled. Then he guided her toward a cluster of donors, my donors, and began introducing her. I watched from across the room as he said the words that would later replay in my mind like a broken recording. "This is Lila. She's been incredibly supportive these past few months." Supportive. That word. Supportive while I was restructuring his failing architecture firm. Supportive while I refinanced the house to cover his debts. Supportive while I worked 16-hour days building the consulting company that now funded everything with our last name on it. The room felt warm. Not suffocating. Just clarified. My best friend Mira appeared at my side. "Why is your husband holding hands with a Pinterest ad?" I handed her my clutch. "Hold this. Ivy. Just hold it." I walked across the ballroom slowly. Not rushed. Not dramatic. The music swelled behind me. Crystal glasses clinked. Someone laughed too loudly. When I reached them, Daniel smiled like nothing was wrong. "There you are," he said. "We were just talking about you." I looked at Lila first. Up close, she smelled like expensive vanilla and insecurity. "That's a beautiful ring," I said gently. Her fingers tightened around Daniel's. "Oh, thank you." Daniel gave it to me. Did he now? I turned to my husband. From the vault. Silence. A donor shifted awkwardly. Lila blinked. "Vault." I kept smiling. "Yes," I said softly. "It's a family heirloom. Passed down through 5 generations." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Ivy, not here." "No," I agreed. "Not here." I reached forward. And instead of ripping the ring off her finger, I adjusted it. Straightened it. Made sure it caught the light. "There," I said quietly. "It suits you." Then I stepped back. "Enjoy the gala." And I walked away. Because revenge doesn't start with screaming. It starts with silence. And that night, while my husband toasted the room with another woman at his side, I began planning his collapse. I waited 3 days before I confronted him. Not because I was hurt. Because I was gathering data. When you spend 10 years building companies from nothing, you learn one thing quickly: emotion is expensive. Strategy is profitable. Daniel came home late every night after the gala. The first night, he didn't mention it. The second night, he said I had misunderstood the optics. The third night, he didn't come home at all. That was when I moved. At 2:17 a.m., I unlocked his office. Daniel liked to think he was careful. Private email. Separate credit card. Burner phone hidden in a shoebox in the back of the closet. Men like him always think they're smarter than the woman who built their safety net. He forgot one small detail. Every account connected to our shared property ran through a financial dashboard I personally configured. And I never stopped monitoring it. By sunrise, I had 6 months of hotel bookings, jewelry purchases, wire transfers labeled consulting bonus that went directly into an account under Lila's name, a lease agreement for a downtown loft, signed by Daniel, paid for with my corporate credit line. I printed everything. Neatly. Organized. Categorized. When Daniel finally walked in at 9:30 a.m., smelling like someone else's shampoo and false confidence, I was in the kitchen making coffee. "You're up early," he muttered. "I always am." He poured himself a glass of water like nothing was wrong. Like he hadn't handed my grandmother's ring to a woman half my age. "Ivy," he sighed, rubbing his temple. "We need to talk about your behavior at the gala." "My behavior?" I turned slowly. "My behavior?" "Yes. You embarrassed Lila." "Oh. Not your wife. Not your marriage. Lila." She felt attacked, he continued. "You put her in a very uncomfortable position." I let the silence stretch. Then I slid the stack of papers across the island counter. The top page was the loft lease. Daniel glanced down. "Didn't touch it." "What is this?" "You tell me." He flipped the first page. Then the second. By the third, his breathing changed. "It's not what you think." I almost laughed. "That line," I said calmly, "should be retired. It's exhausted." He ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't plan for this to blow up." "Blow up?" Like we were discussing a minor scheduling conflict. She was just. "Careful," I interrupted gently. "Choose the next word wisely." He hesitated. "She made me feel respected." There it was. Respected. Because admiration from a 24-year-old in turn feels better than partnership from a woman who challenges you. "I've been drowning in your shadow for years, Ivy," he said. "Your success, your control over everything, it's suffocating." Control. Interesting word for paying your debts. "So," I said quietly, "you decided to take my heirloom, my credit, and my name and build a secret life to feel taller." His jaw clenched. "I was going to tell you." "When?" He didn't answer. Because the truth was simple. He wasn't leaving me. He was trying to replace me. While still cashing my checks. I gathered the papers calmly. "You don't get to feel emasculated on my payroll." "Ivy." "No." I met his eyes fully. "I don't care about the affair." That part surprised him. "What I care about," I continued, "is theft." He went pale. "The loft. Paid with my line of credit. The transfers. Routed through my accounts. The ring? That was not yours to give." He swallowed. "I'll return it." "No," I said softly. "You won't." He stared at me. "Why?" Because by then, I had already filed a fraud inquiry with my legal team. And frozen the account that funded his little love nest. "You wanted respect," I said. "You're about to learn what it costs." Then I picked up my keys and walked out. Because phase 1 of revenge isn't confrontation. It's destabilization. And Daniel had just lost access to everything he thought was his. He just didn't know it yet. Daniel called me 12 times before noon. I declined every single one. By 1 p.m., his architecture firm's office manager called instead. Ivy, there's a situation. Of course there was. I stepped into a glass conference room in my building and shut the door. What kind of situation? There's been a hold placed on the company operating account. Yes, I said calmly. There has. Silence. Then a cautious inhale. Payroll is tomorrow. I checked my watch. Then Daniel should probably figure that out. The panic was immediate. Ivy, we thought, you've always handled the liquidity injections. Yes. I had. For 3 years, Daniel's firm had operated at a loss. For 3 years, I quietly covered deficits through strategic transfers labeled as temporary loans. Temporary. How generous of me. Please have Daniel call his accountant, I said. This is no longer my responsibility. I hung up before she could beg. Then I forwarded 3 emails to my legal counsel. Unauthorized use of marital credit line. Asset misrepresentation. Transfer of heirloom property without consent. Within 30 minutes, my attorney replied. Proceeding. We recommend formal separation documentation immediately. I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself one slow breath. I wasn't angry. Anger is chaotic. I was precise. At 3:47 p.m., Daniel showed up at my office. Security called upstairs first. He says it's urgent. It is, I replied. Let him up. I wanted him rattled. The elevator doors opened, and he walked in looking less polished than usual. No tie. Sleeves rolled. Eyes slightly bloodshot. Ivy, what did you do? I stayed seated behind my desk. What did you do? He exhaled sharply. The account is frozen. Vendors are calling me. Payroll is due. You can't just pull funding without warning. I folded my hands. I can. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. You're sabotaging my company. No, I corrected. I'm withdrawing my support. That's the same thing. It isn't. I opened a folder and slid a document toward him. This is the loan agreement you signed 2 years ago. Clause 4.2. Primary investor reserves the right to suspend funding in cases of financial misconduct. His face drained. You wouldn't. I already have. He paced once. Twice. This is because of her. This, I said evenly, is because you confused access with ownership. His laugh was hollow. You built that firm for me. I built it because I believed in you. He stopped pacing. And now? Now I believe in data. Silence stretched between us. Then he tried a different tactic. Lila doesn't mean anything. I raised an eyebrow. She was just someone who made me feel important. You were important, I replied. You just weren't exceptional. The words hit harder than I intended. Or maybe exactly as intended. You think you're untouchable, he snapped. You think money makes you superior. No, I said softly. Competence does. He flinched. I gave you everything, he said, voice rising. You gave me debt. His mouth opened. Closed. And for the first time since the gala. He looked scared. Good. Because he was starting to understand. This wasn't about jealousy. This wasn't about heartbreak. This was about consequences. I need access restored, he said finally. Just temporarily. I'll fix things. No. Ivy. I've already initiated separation proceedings. The words landed like a dropped glass. You're filing for divorce. I'm restructuring my liabilities. He stared at me. You're unbelievable. I am, I agreed. Then I pressed the intercom. Security. Daniel's head snapped toward the door. Yes, Ms. Laurent, the guard answered. Please escort Mr. Laurent out. Daniel stepped closer to my desk. You're making a mistake. I stood up slowly. No, I said. You did. And as security guided him toward the elevator, I watched without blinking. Because revenge isn't loud. It's administrative. And today, Daniel learned what happens when you betray the person who signs your checks. He wasn't drowning yet. But the tide had turned. And I was no longer the one holding him up. The media picked it up before Daniel understood how bad it was. Architecture circles are small. Finance circles are smaller. And when an investor quietly withdraws support from a mid-sized firm over financial misconduct, people notice. Especially when that investor is me. By Friday morning, 2 of Daniel's largest clients had postponed projects. Just until things stabilize, they told him. Translation: we don't trust you. At 10:12 a.m., I received an email from his board requesting a meeting. I almost admired the speed. Desperation accelerates decision-making. I arrived at Daniel's firm at exactly noon. Neutral expression. Navy suit. Minimal jewelry. No ring. The receptionist wouldn't meet my eyes. The boardroom smelled like stale coffee and anxiety. 5 men. 1 woman. All staring at me as if I were both savior and executioner. Thank you for coming, Ivy, the chairman began carefully. I assume this is about liquidity. And reputational risk, another added. I folded my hands. Reputational risk. They exchanged glances. One of them cleared his throat. There are rumors. Of course there were. Daniel had been sloppy. Private lofts. Interns. Shared vendor accounts. Men who cheat rarely cheat in isolation. They blur lines everywhere. I don't deal in rumors, I said calmly. I deal in documentation. I slid a thin folder onto the table. Inside were transaction summaries. Nothing dramatic. Just numbers. Misallocated funds. Unapproved expenses. Personal purchases under business codes. The silence grew heavy. The woman on the board flipped pages slowly. This is embezzlement territory. Correct. The chairman shifted in his seat. Why bring this to us instead of pursuing legal action? I met his gaze evenly. Because I invested in this firm believing it had long-term viability. Pause. And I'd prefer to salvage the asset rather than liquidate it. There it was. The unspoken choice. Remove Daniel. Or lose me. The board members didn't speak for a full 30 seconds. Finally, someone asked the obvious question. Are you asking us to terminate him? I didn't smile. I'm asking you to assess risk. They all understood. Without my capital injection, the firm would collapse within 6 weeks. Payroll, vendors, leases, all dependent on liquidity Daniel could no longer access. And unlike him, they knew I wasn't bluffing. The chairman leaned back. If we vote to suspend Daniel pending investigation, would funding resume? I didn't hesitate. Yes. Another long silence. Then the woman on the board spoke quietly. We can't protect him from this. No one argued. Because this wasn't about morality. It was about survival. I left before the vote concluded. I didn't need to stay. By 4:38 p.m., Daniel called again. I let it ring once. Twice. Then answered. You went to my board? Yes. You're destroying me. No, I corrected. You did that. They're suspending me pending investigation. That's standard procedure. You fed them documents. I provided transparency. His breathing was sharp now. They think I stole from the firm. Did you? Silence. Then anger. You think you're righteous? No, I said softly. I'm prepared. I trusted you. And I funded you. He exhaled like something inside him was finally cracking. You're punishing me because I embarrassed you. That made me pause. Because that was the first honest thing he'd said. Yes, I replied calmly. I am. Not because of the affair. Not because of the ring. But because he thought he could humiliate me publicly. And still privately depend on me. That miscalculation cost him everything. You don't have to ruin my career, he said more quietly now. I'm not ruining it. I let the words sink in. I'm removing myself from it. And the truth. Without me, his career was a house built on air. You'll regret this, he muttered. No, I said. I'll reinvest. I hung up before he could respond. That evening, I poured myself a single glass of wine and stood on my balcony overlooking the city. 3 days ago, he had introduced another woman under my name. Tonight, he was suspended from his own firm. And I hadn't raised my voice once. Revenge doesn't require chaos. It requires leverage. And Daniel was finally starting to understand. He had married the wrong woman to betray. This was only phase 2. And I was nowhere near finished. The ring came back to me on a Tuesday. Not from Daniel. From her. Lila arrived at my office unannounced at 11:06 a.m. Security called first. There's a young woman here asking to see you. She says it's personal. Of course it was. Send her up. I was curious. Not emotionally. Strategically. When she walked in, she looked smaller than I remembered. Less polished. No photographers. No gala lighting. Just a girl in a beige coat holding a leather purse too tightly. She didn't sit until I gestured. You wanted to see me? I asked calmly. She swallowed. I didn't know. That was her opening line. Interesting choice. You didn't know what? I asked. That the ring was yours. He told me it was an old investment piece he'd kept from before you. I studied her face. There was fear there. But not guilt. She wasn't here because she felt bad. She was here because something had shifted. You've seen the news, I said. Yes. Daniel's suspension had become industry gossip. Whispers about misuse of funds. About investor withdrawal. About instability. Men like him fall loudly. He said you were overreacting, she continued. That you were trying to control him. I almost smiled. And what do you think now? Her eyes flickered. I think he lied. Finally. She opened her purse slowly and placed a small velvet box on my desk. Inside, the emerald ring. For a split second, something inside me tightened. Not sadness. Not nostalgia. Just reclamation. I didn't reach for it immediately. Why return it? I asked. She hesitated. He froze the loft account. Of course he had. When my legal team locked down financial lines, everything tied to them froze too. Rent unpaid. Utilities suspended. Luxury evaporated. And? I prompted. He said it was temporary. That you were bluffing. I leaned back. And you don't believe that anymore? She shook her head. They audited him yesterday. I was called in. Ah. There it was. Collateral damage. He told them I was consulting. And were you? No. At least she had enough self-awareness to answer honestly. What did he promise you? I asked. Her voice dropped. That he'd leave you. That he just needed time to secure assets. Secure assets. I almost laughed. He truly thought I'd hand over pieces of myself quietly. And now? I asked. He can't even access his own office. Silence lingered between us. Then she said something unexpected. I didn't think you'd fight back. There it was. The assumption. That I would scream. Cry. Beg. That I would cling to dignity while he rearranged my life. I don't fight, I said evenly. I calculate. She looked at the ring again. You must hate me. I considered that carefully. I don't know you, I replied. You were convenient. Her shoulders dropped slightly. That stung more than anger would have. You're going to destroy him, she said quietly. No, I corrected gently. I'm letting him stand alone. That's worse. Because when you remove the scaffolding, people see what the structure is really made of. She stood to leave. At the door, she paused. He's not stable, she said softly. He's angry. He thinks you're humiliating him on purpose. I met her eyes without blinking. I am. She flinched. Not because I was cruel, but because I was honest. After she left, I finally picked up the ring. It felt heavier than I remembered. I slid it onto my finger. Perfect fit. Then I called my attorney. Proceed with the asset review expansion, I said calmly. Add personal liability for reputational damage. There was a pause. That will finish him. I know. Because Daniel didn't just cheat. He gambled with my name. And in my industry, reputation is currency. By sunset, 3 more of his clients withdrew. By midnight, an anonymous tip surfaced about questionable invoices under his authorization. The board escalated the investigation. And for the first time since the gala, Daniel stopped calling. Not because he was calm. Because he was scrambling. And scrambling men make mistakes. I stood at my window again that night, city lights glittering beneath me. The ring caught the reflection of street lamps. Phase 3 had begun. And this time, he didn't have a mistress to cushion the fall. Daniel showed up at the house on Sunday night. Not the penthouse I'd moved into 3 years ago. The original house. The one we bought when his firm was still an idea scribbled on napkins. I hadn't been back there in months. But I still owned it. Technically, we both did. Legally, that was about to change. I was in the study reviewing revised separation drafts when I heard the front door slam. Not close. Slam. Footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Unsteady. Ivy. His voice cracked on my name. Interesting. I walked out slowly. He looked terrible. Unshaven. Wrinkled shirt. Eyes red, not from tears, from lack of sleep. You froze everything, he said without preamble. Yes. They're talking about criminal review. That tends to happen when numbers don't align. He ran both hands through his hair like he could physically pull control back into his skull. You went too far. No, I said calmly. You underestimated how far I'd go. He laughed, sharp, unstable. All this because I wanted something that wasn't suffocating. Suffocating? I repeated softly. You controlled every dollar. Every decision. I couldn't breathe in my own company. You mean the company I financed? That's not the point. It is exactly the point. His chest rose and fell rapidly. You didn't have to destroy me. You destroyed the marriage, I replied. I'm restructuring the aftermath. He stepped closer. Too close. This is about ego. Yes, I agreed. That's part of it. Honesty unsettles people more than denial. You couldn't stand that someone chose me over you, he said. I tilted my head. She didn't choose you. He frowned. You paid for her. That landed. His jaw flexed. You think you're so superior. No, I said quietly. I think I was loyal. Silence. For a flicker of a second, something almost human crossed his face. Regret. But regret without accountability is just self-pity. You could stop this, he said, voice dropping. Call off the review. Restore partial funding. We can handle this privately. Privately. So he could salvage his image. So he could spin the narrative. You publicly humiliated me, I reminded him gently. You don't get a private resolution. He looked around the house like it no longer recognized him. I built this place. You decorated it, I corrected. I paid the mortgage. Technically true. With money I transferred into joint accounts. Where am I supposed to go? He asked suddenly. Ah. There it was. Not remorse. Inconvenience. I hear the loft has availability, I said evenly. His face twisted. That's gone. Yes. Silence fell heavy between us. He had nowhere left that wasn't tied to me. And for the first time, he understood the architecture of dependency. You planned this, he whispered. Not the affair, I said. But the response. He stared at me like he was finally seeing the woman he married. Not soft. Not fragile. Capable. You're cold, he said. No, I replied. I'm finished. That's different. Cold implies absence of feeling. Finished implies completion. He looked smaller now. Less arrogant. More desperate. They're going to disbar me from future contracts, he muttered. No one wants scandal. Scandal. He tasted the word like it was unfair. You introduced scandal, I reminded him. They're exaggerating it. No, I said softly. I just removed the curtain. His shoulders sagged. For a moment, I almost felt something like pity. Almost. But then I remembered the gala. The cameras. The whispering donors. The emerald flashing under chandelier light. And the way he looked at me. Annoyed. Like I was the inconvenience. You'll regret this, he said again, weaker now. I walked to the door and opened it. No, I said. You will. He didn't move at first. Then slowly, he stepped past me. Out into the cold evening air. No car waiting. No driver. No loft. No mistress. Just consequences. When the door closed, the house felt quieter than it ever had. Not empty. Cleared. Phase 4 was simple. Isolation. And Daniel was finally alone. The formal audit began on Wednesday. Daniel wasn't arrested. Not yet. But the word forensic attached to your financial review does something to a man's spine. It straightens it. Or breaks it. By Thursday morning, 2 senior employees resigned. One cited ethical concerns. The other simply sent a 3-line email. I will not be associated with this. Investors don't wait for verdicts. They respond to perception. And perception was turning toxic. I was at my office when Mira walked in without knocking. She rarely did that. You've become a villain in 3 group chats, she announced, dropping into the chair across from me. I didn't look up from my laptop. Which ones? Daniel's friends. Some mutuals. Apparently you're overreacting. I closed the screen slowly. Overreacting to what? To a man being human. Ah. The classic defense. He cheated, she continued. They think you're using your power to ruin him. I am using my power, I said calmly. She studied me. You don't look angry. I'm not. That part was true. The anger had burned off days ago. What remained was clarity. Do you still love him? She asked carefully. Interesting question. I leaned back in my chair. I loved who he was when he was building something, I said. Not who he became when he thought he deserved it. Mira nodded slowly. Word is he's telling people you're unstable. I smiled faintly. Of course he is. When men lose leverage, they attack credibility. She's vindictive. She's emotional. She's spiraling. It's predictable. Does it bother you? Mira asked. No. Because narratives collapse under documentation. And I had documentation. That afternoon, I received a formal notice from the board. Daniel had been placed on indefinite leave pending full investigation. Access revoked. Authority suspended. Public statement drafted. They asked if I'd like to review the language before release. I made one small edit. Replace internal discrepancies with unauthorized financial conduct. Precision matters. The statement went live at 4:02 p.m. By 4:15, industry blogs picked it up. By 6 o'clock, Daniel called again. I answered this time. You edited the statement, he said flatly. Yes. You made it sound criminal. It is. You're enjoying this. No, I said truthfully. I'm correcting the record. He exhaled sharply. I can't get hired anywhere if this sticks. That's not my responsibility. You're my wife. Not for long. Silence. Then something shifted in his tone. Fear. Real fear. They're asking about personal transfers, he said. They're tracing everything. Yes, I replied calmly. That's what audits do. You reported me. I reported misuse of my assets. You could have handled it privately. You made it public. That truth again. He hated it. They're freezing my personal accounts next, he muttered. Yes. You knew that. Yes. A long pause. Then, quieter. I'll lose everything. I let that sit between us. Because that was the point he needed to reach. Not defensiveness. Not anger. Recognition. You gambled everything, I said softly. On admiration. He didn't respond. Because he couldn't argue that. She left, he added suddenly. Of course she did. Did she? She says she doesn't want drama. I almost laughed. She wanted comfort. Silence again. What do you want from me? He asked finally. There it was. The assumption that this was negotiation. I don't want anything, I replied. That's the problem, he said. No. That was the freedom. When you stop wanting justice, apology, closure. You act without hesitation. I'll survive this, he muttered. Maybe, I said. But not as you were. And that's the part he hadn't fully processed. This wasn't temporary damage. This was structural. His reputation would always carry an asterisk. His future contracts would come with questions. His confidence would crack under scrutiny. Not because I slandered him. Because I stopped protecting him. I never thought you'd do this, he said quietly. I never thought you'd force me to. I ended the call. Outside my office window, the city moved as usual. Traffic. Deadlines. Meetings. No one paused because a man had fallen from his own arrogance. The world rarely does. But Daniel was starting to understand something critical. I wasn't trying to destroy him. I was simply no longer absorbing the consequences of his decisions. And without that shield, he was exposed. Phase 5 was underway. And exposure is far more painful than revenge. The first legal threat arrived in a thick cream envelope. Hand-delivered. Dramatic. Inside was a notice from Daniel's attorney alleging malicious financial interference and intentional reputational harm. I read it twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was desperate. By noon, my lawyer called. They're attempting to claim you weaponized your investor position. Did I? A pause. No, she admitted. You exercised contractual rights. Then we respond accordingly. Daniel wasn't fighting for the marriage anymore. He was fighting for narrative control. He needed to frame me as excessive, vindictive, dangerous. Men like him survive on perception. If he could paint himself as the victim of a ruthless wife, maybe sympathy would buy him time. That afternoon, I received something more interesting than a legal notice. An email from one of Daniel's former project managers. Subject line, "You deserve to know." Inside were forwarded internal messages. Requests from Daniel instructing staff to recode personal expenses under client development. Private dinners. Luxury gifts. Travel. Not just for Lila. 4 months. I stared at the timestamps. The affair hadn't started 6 months ago. It had started nearly a year ago. Which meant the gala wasn't arrogance. It was escalation. He thought he was safe. I forwarded the email to my attorney. Add this to the file, I said. You understand what this means, she asked carefully. Yes. This will push it toward criminal. Yes. A long silence. You're certain? I looked down at my grandmother's emerald ring resting against my keyboard. Yes. By evening, Daniel showed up again. But this time, he didn't pound on the door. He stood outside. Waiting. I watched him through the security camera feed for almost a full minute before opening it remotely. He stepped inside slowly. Not aggressive. Not loud. Just exhausted. You're pressing charges, he said. I'm cooperating with the investigation. You're handing them everything. Yes. He nodded like he expected that answer. They're going to subpoena my accounts. Yes. I could face jail. Possibly. You think I deserve that? He asked quietly. I studied him. I think actions have outcomes. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. He sank into a chair like his bones were heavier than usual. You're not even angry anymore, he said. I don't need to be. That confused him. Because he still believed emotion fueled this. It didn't. Clarity did. I made mistakes, he said, voice low. I was insecure. I wanted to feel admired. You wanted to feel superior, I corrected. Silence. That's not a crime. No, I agreed. But fraud is. He winced. I never meant for it to spiral. Intent doesn't erase impact. His hands trembled slightly. For the first time, I saw real fear. Not ego. Not rage. Fear. If I go down, he said slowly, your name gets dragged too. We're still legally married. There it was. The attempt to anchor me to the wreckage. I've already filed emergency separation status, I said calmly. Effective last week. His head snapped up. You? Yes. He stared at me like I'd just revealed the final move in a chess match he didn't know we were playing. You planned every step, he whispered. No, I replied. I adapted. Silence filled the room. Thick. Heavy. Why didn't you just leave me? He asked finally. That question lingered longer than the others. Because it wasn't defensive. It was confused. I am leaving you, I said softly. I'm just making sure you don't leave with my foundation. He closed his eyes briefly. You loved me once. I did. And now? I considered that carefully. Now I understand you. That hurt him more than hatred would have. Because understanding removes illusion. And without illusion, there's nothing left to defend. He stood slowly. If this goes to court, it will. He nodded once. Resigned. Then he walked out without another word. No threats. No promises. Just quiet. And as the door shut behind him, I realized something unexpected. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was correction. Phase 6 had begun. And Daniel was finally running out of moves. The subpoena arrived 2 weeks later. Not for me. For him. Federal seal. Official language. No room for charm. Daniel called at 7:12 a.m. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short. They're charging me. No anger. No theatrics. Just shock. By noon, the news had broken in our industry circles. Not headlines. Not national scandal. But in the world he lived in. It was devastating. Financial misconduct investigation expands. Founder faces potential fraud charges. Investor spouse withdraws involvement. They didn't name me directly. But everyone knew. Mira sent me a screenshot from a private forum. He flew too close to his wife's money. Cruel. Accurate. I didn't celebrate. There's no champagne moment when someone's life starts collapsing in real time. Just a quiet acknowledgement. He chose this. That afternoon, his lawyer called my attorney requesting settlement talks. Interesting. Suddenly criminal exposure makes reconciliation attractive. I took the meeting. Not because I intended to save him. Because I wanted to hear what he believed I owed him. We met in a neutral conference room downtown. Daniel looked thinner. Suit hanging slightly loose. Confidence reduced to calculation. His lawyer did most of the talking. My client is willing to accept full divorce terms without contest, he said smoothly. In exchange for a statement from Mrs. Lauron clarifying she does not believe criminal intent was present. Ah. There it was. He wanted insulation. He wanted me to soften the narrative. I don't control the prosecutor, I said evenly. But your cooperation influences direction, the lawyer replied. Daniel finally spoke. I'll sign everything, he said. Assets. Properties. I won't fight you. I studied him carefully. What are you asking for? I asked. A statement, he repeated. Just one. Saying this was marital conflict, not fraud. I held his gaze. You transferred funds. Yes. You misclassified expenses. Yes. You authorized payments for personal benefit under business codes. His jaw tightened. Yes. Then it's fraud. His lawyer shifted. We can argue negligence. You can argue anything, I interrupted calmly. That doesn't make it true. Daniel's composure cracked slightly. I'll lose my license, he said quietly. Yes. I'll lose future contracts. Yes. I could lose my freedom. I let that hang in the air. Because here was the truth. I could have intervened earlier. I could have quietly absorbed losses. I could have buried discrepancies. I had protected him before. Multiple times. This time, I didn't. "Why won't you help me?" he asked, voice thinner than I'd ever heard it. That question deserved honesty. "Because helping you would mean lying," I said softly. Silence. His lawyer leaned forward. "Surely there's room for discretion." I shook my head. "Discretion is what allowed this." Daniel looked at me differently then. Not with anger. Not with resentment. But with something closer to comprehension. "You really won't save me," he said. "No," I replied. "I won't." The meeting ended without agreement. Outside, the sky was overcast. Gray. Heavy. Appropriate. That evening, I sat alone in my penthouse, the emerald ring cool against my finger. My phone buzzed once. A message from Daniel. "I thought you'd always protect me." I stared at it for a long moment. Then replied. "I thought you'd never need protection from yourself." No response came after that. 2 days later, formal charges were filed. White collar. Financial misrepresentation. Pending trial. His firm dissolved within a week. Assets frozen. Board members publicly distanced themselves. Friends stopped calling him. And slowly, the noise faded. Not because it wasn't serious, but because the world moves on. Scandals become footnotes. Warnings whispered at networking events. Be careful who you tie your finances to. He had wanted admiration. He ended with infamy. And I had something unexpected. Peace. Not because he was suffering, but because I was no longer responsible for preventing it. Phase 7 was complete. There was only one thing left now. The final reckoning. And it wasn't about court. It was about closure. The trial date was set for early spring. 3 months away. Long enough for headlines to cool. Long enough for whispers to settle into quiet judgment. Daniel didn't fight the divorce. He signed everything. The house. The remaining shared accounts. Even the art collection he once insisted on curating himself. He signed like a man trading objects for oxygen. But freedom wasn't mine to grant. We finalized the divorce in a silent courtroom on a gray Monday morning. No dramatics. No tears. Just signatures. The judge barely looked at us. To her, we were paperwork. To him, it was the end of a decade. When we stepped into the hallway, Daniel paused beside me. "I never thought it would end like this," he said. Neither did I. That was the truth. I thought if it ended, it would be sad. Not strategic. Not clinical. "Are you happy?" he asked. I considered that carefully. "I'm stable," I replied. He gave a faint, hollow laugh. "You always were." There was something almost respectful in his tone now. "Too late. You could still issue that statement," he said quietly. "It would help." And there it was again. Hope. I turned to face him fully. "Daniel, I didn't create this outcome. You accelerated it." "No," I said softly. I stopped delaying it. He absorbed that in silence. For the first time since the gala. He didn't argue. "I did love you," he said finally. "I know. And I ruined it." "Yes." No cruelty. No embellishment. Just fact. He nodded slowly. "I don't think I understood what I had." "That's the problem with admiration," I said. "It feels bigger than loyalty." He looked at the emerald ring on my hand. "You kept it. It was never yours to give." A long pause lingered between us. "I'm scared," he admitted. That was new. Raw. Honest. The confident architect who once introduced a mistress under chandelier light. Was afraid. You should be, I said gently. Because fear means you understand consequences. He swallowed. If I go to prison. That's between you and the court. His shoulders dropped. Resignation. Will you come? He asked suddenly. To what? If there's sentencing. I studied him. Why would he want that? Witness. Punishment. Closure? I don't know, I said truthfully. He nodded. Then, without another word, he walked away. No dramatic glance back. No final plea. Just a man heading toward uncertainty. I stood in that hallway a few seconds longer. Not because I was shaken, but because I realized something unexpected. I didn't hate him. I didn't want him destroyed. I wanted the truth acknowledged. And now it was. That evening, I hosted a small dinner at my penthouse. Not a celebration. A reclamation. Mira raised her glass. To new beginnings. I didn't toast to revenge. I didn't toast to victory. I toasted to clarity. Because revenge feels sharp. But clarity feels clean. And as the city lights shimmered below, I understood something fully for the first time. Daniel's collapse wasn't my triumph. It was the natural result of removing myself from his recklessness. Phase 8 wasn't explosive. It was quiet. He would face court. He would face judgment. And I would move forward. The only question left was whether closure required witnessing his fall. Or simply walking away before it finished. The trial was approaching. And I still hadn't decided. I didn't plan to attend the first day of the trial. I told myself it was unnecessary. My statements had been filed. My documentation submitted. My involvement technically complete. But the morning it began, I woke before sunrise. No alarm. Just instinct. For months, I had controlled the pace. The structure. The fallout. Today, I wouldn't control anything. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Fluorescent lights. Wooden benches. A faint hum of ventilation. No chandelier. No gala glamour. Just consequence. Daniel stood when the judge entered. He looked different in a courtroom than he had in boardrooms. Smaller. Contained. His lawyer leaned close, whispering strategy. He didn't look at me at first. Then he did. And in that split second, something passed between us. Not anger. Not affection. Recognition. The prosecutor outlined the charges methodically. Unauthorized transfers. Intentional misclassification. Personal enrichment under fiduciary obligation. Each phrase landed clean. Clinical. The evidence wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Spreadsheets are ruthless. Email threads are unforgiving. Numbers don't tremble when they testify. When they called my name to confirm financial oversight documentation, I stood. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I answered precisely. Yes. 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 The prosecutor asked one final question. Mrs. Loran, did you at any point authorize your husband to transfer these funds for personal use? No. Clear. Final. Daniel stared at the defense table. He didn't interrupt. He didn't object. He didn't even shift. For the first time in years, he wasn't negotiating. He was absorbing. During recess, he approached me carefully in the hallway. No security blocking him. No shouting. Just quiet. You didn't have to come, he said. I know. Why did you? I thought about that. Because I wanted to see the truth spoken out loud. He nodded slowly. They're going to make an example of me. You made yourself one. No venom. Just fact. He exhaled. I keep replaying the gala in my head. Of course he did. Why? I asked. Because that's when I realized you weren't going to break. I almost smiled. You miscalculated. Yes. He hesitated. I thought you'd scream. I know. I thought you'd beg. I know. He swallowed. You didn't. No. Silence stretched. If I had apologized then, he began. It wouldn't have changed the math, I said gently. That seemed to settle something inside him. This wasn't about one moment. It was about a pattern. Court resumed. The forensic accountant walked through transactions in painful detail. Every dinner. Every transfer. Every recoded expense. Laid bare. By the end of the day, the room felt heavy. Not dramatic. Just inevitable. As we exited the courthouse, reporters waited outside. Not a swarm. Just enough. Mrs. Laurent, do you feel vindicated? One called. Interesting word. I paused briefly. I feel resolved, I replied. And I meant it. Because vindication implies emotional victory. Resolution implies completion. Daniel didn't speak to the press. He kept his eyes down. As his car pulled away, I realized something quietly powerful. The humiliation he once inflicted under chandeliers was now replaced by public accountability under fluorescent light. Not revenge. Balance. Phase 9 wasn't explosive. It was undeniable. And there was still one more step left. Sentencing. And whatever it would bring with it. Sentencing took less than 20 minutes. 10 years of marriage. A year of deceit. Months of investigation. All distilled into a brief reading of consequences. The courtroom was quieter than during trial. No press this time. No spectators hoping for spectacle. Just procedure. Daniel stood as the judge reviewed findings. No prior criminal history. Clear evidence of intentional misrepresentation. Significant financial impact. Breach of fiduciary trust. The words weren't cruel. They were structured. And structure is merciless. When the sentence was delivered, 18 months, reduced for cooperation, plus financial penalties, Daniel didn't react visibly. But I saw it. The microflinch. The moment of future narrows. It wasn't decades. It wasn't ruin beyond repair. But it was permanent. A record. A stain. A story that would follow him into every room. The judge added something unexpected. This court recognizes the damage caused not only to financial stakeholders, but to personal trust. Personal trust. Interesting that she said it. Daniel's shoulders shifted almost imperceptibly. He understood the double meaning. When proceedings ended, he turned to look at me. No accusation. No bitterness. Just quiet acknowledgement. I stepped into the hallway before he could reach me. But he followed. I guess this is it, he said. Yes. He looked thinner still. Not physically broken. But humbled. I kept thinking you'd stop it before it got here, he admitted. I know. You always fix things. I fixed problems, I corrected gently. Not patterns. That seemed to settle heavily on him. I never meant to become this person, he said. No one does. Silence lingered. If I had felt secure, he began. Security isn't given, I said softly. It's built. And he had built his on borrowed ground. He glanced at my ring one last time. You wore it through all of this. Yes. Why? Because that mattered. Because legacy mattered. Because I refused to let betrayal redefine inheritance. Because it's mine, I said simply. He nodded. There was nothing left to argue. Take care of yourself, he said finally. I intend to. And then. He was escorted away. Not dramatically. Not violently. Just guided. Controlled. Finite. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Not grieving. Not celebrating. Just absorbing the finality. 18 months. He would serve time. He would re-enter a world that moved on without him. He would rebuild, or he wouldn't. That was no longer my equation. As I stepped outside, the air felt sharper. Cleaner. I expected to feel triumph. Instead, I felt something far quieter. Relief. Not because he was punished. But because the cycle had ended. For months, everything had been reaction. Documentation. Legal strategy. Containment. Now. There was nothing left to manage. No hearings. No negotiations. No defensive posture. Just forward movement. Mira texted me as I got into my car. Done? I typed back. Done. But closure isn't a single moment. It's a series of small realizations. And the next one came later that night, alone in my apartment. I stood at the window again, city lights glittering beneath me like they had the night of the gala. Same skyline. Different woman. Back then, I had begun planning his collapse. Now. There was nothing left to plan. Phase 10 was complete. Only one part remained. What to do with the space he left behind. The first morning after sentencing, I woke up expecting noise. Emails. Legal updates. Crisis. Instead. Silence. No emergency calls. No strategy meetings. No legal briefs requiring review. For months, my days had been structured around containment. Now there was nothing left to contain. That was the strangest part. Revenge had a rhythm. Closure had stillness. I made coffee slowly. Sat at the kitchen island. Watched sunlight spill across marble floors that Daniel once claimed felt too cold. I used to think that comment was about design. Now I knew it was about me. Competence unsettles insecure people. Especially when it's quiet. My phone buzzed mid-morning. An unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Hello. A pause. Then his voice. Not from a courtroom. Not from a boardroom. From somewhere smaller. They process calls quickly in here, Daniel said. In here. The reality of it settled differently hearing it that way. How are you? He asked. Not accusatory. Just human. I'm well, I replied. A faint exhale. I didn't expect you to answer. I didn't expect you to call. Silence stretched between us. I've had a lot of time to think already, he said. I imagine you will. That's not sarcasm, is it? No. He laughed quietly. I used to think you were calculating because you didn't feel deeply. And now? I think you felt deeply and chose not to drown in it. That surprised me. Growth rarely announces itself loudly. I was angry, I admitted. Just not in the way you expected. I expected chaos. I know. Another pause. They don't care who you were in here, he said softly. Only what you did. There it was. The stripping away of identity. I hope you used the time well, I said. I don't know who I am without everything. Without the firm. Without the admiration. Without the illusion. That's probably the first honest foundation you'll have, I replied. He was quiet for a long moment. Do you ever regret not protecting me? He asked. That question deserved reflection. I regret loving someone who confused dependence with devotion, I said calmly. But I don't regret protecting myself. Another long silence. I don't hate you, he said suddenly. I don't hate you either. And that was true. Hatred requires energy. I had none left to give him. I think that's what hurts the most, he admitted. Because indifference is colder than anger. The automated voice cut in. You have 1 minute remaining. I'm sorry, he said quickly. Not defensive. Not strategic. Just simple. I know, I replied. And for the first time, I believed him. The call ended with a soft click. No dramatic goodbye. Just time expiring. I set my phone down and stood by the window again. The city was alive as always. Unbothered by individual downfall. I expected to feel something heavy. Instead, I felt light. Not because he was suffering, but because I wasn't responsible for his suffering anymore. That distinction mattered. Phase 11 wasn't about destruction. It was about release. There was only one final chapter left. Not his. Mine. And it wouldn't be about revenge at all. It would be about what I chose to build. Now that no one was leaning on it without permission. 6 months after sentencing, I sold the original house. Not because I needed the money. Because I didn't need the memory. The realtor asked if I felt sentimental walking through it one last time. I didn't. I felt observant. The kitchen where I balanced budgets at midnight. The study where I drafted contracts that saved his firm twice. The hallway where he once kissed my forehead and said, I couldn't do this without you. That part had been true. He couldn't. The problem was, he thought he eventually could. I left the keys on the counter and didn't look back. Some chapters don't need revisiting. They need closing. My company expanded that year. Not aggressively. Intentionally. I shifted focus toward financial literacy initiatives for founders, particularly women building alongside partners. Not because I was bitter. Because I was informed. At one seminar, a young woman approached me afterward. How do you know when someone's admiration is real? She asked. I considered the question carefully. Admiration applauds you in public, I said. Respect protects you in private. She wrote that down like it mattered. I hoped it would. Daniel wrote twice during those 18 months. The first letter was awkward. Apologetic in structure but still circling ego. The second was different. Clearer. He didn't ask for help. He didn't ask for statements. He simply acknowledged. I confused being supported with being superior. I confused attention with value. I confused access with ownership. That was the first time he truly understood. I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty. But because growth doesn't require an audience. The emerald ring never left my hand. Not as a symbol of marriage. As a symbol of inheritance. Of continuity. Of something that existed before him, and will exist after him. One evening, nearly a year after the gala, I attended another charity event. Different venue. Different donors. Same kind of glittering lights. I wore a black gown. Minimal jewelry. The emerald. As I entered the ballroom, a few people glanced at me knowingly. Whispers still follow stories. But they felt lighter now. Like history instead of scandal. A man approached midway through the evening. Not young. Not flashy. Grounded. I've heard about your resilience, he said. I almost smiled. That's a generous word. He tilted his head slightly. What would you call it? I thought about the gala. About silence. About spreadsheets and subpoenas. About fluorescent lights and courtroom air. Boundaries, I said. Because that's what this was. Not revenge. Not vengeance. Not cruelty. Boundaries enforced without apology. Later that night, standing beneath chandeliers again, I caught my reflection in a mirrored column. Calm. Composed. Untouched by the noise that once tried to define me. Daniel had wanted admiration. He had mistaken it for power. I wanted stability. And I built it. He gambled with illusion. I invested in truth. And truth always compounds. When I left the ballroom, there were no dramatic exits. No confrontation. No final words. Just a woman walking into cool night air. Unburdened. The greatest revenge wasn't his sentence. It wasn't the dissolution of his firm. It wasn't even the public reckoning. The greatest revenge was this. I remained standing. And I never once begged him to stay.